So today we're here to talk about what it looks like for states to come on board to the Compact Connect software, which is what states are going to be using to participate in the audiology and speech language pathology compact, the OT compact, and the counseling compact. I'm Isabel Eliason, and I work for the Council of State Governments. My role in this project is that I am the product manager, so I kind of talk to the three compacts and figure out what their needs are, and then communicate that to our developers, so we're able to build the software that the compacts need. All right. So yeah, first of all, what is Compact Connect? This is the software that I mentioned. It's going to be used to implement three different compacts: the OT compact, the audiology and speech language pathology compact, and the counseling compact. Many of the states on this call are probably members of all three compacts. For some of you, you may be a member of just one or two compacts. But whatever the case may be, this is the software that the compact will be using to kind of issue privileges, and it'll be the way for states to keep track of discipline information and for them to share licensure information with other states. And so it will be required for states to use if they, want to be issuing privileges and receiving that information from other states. And then also from the perspective of compact administrators, the system is a way for them to track finances, look at notifications, that type of thing. All right, I'll talk a little bit about the history of the project. So initially, these three compacts didn't plan to work together. They had planned to probably each build their own system, but eventually they realized that they had really similar needs. These three compacts all follow extremely similar models. And so they realized it would be a good way to save money if they were able to work together. But just to give you an idea of how long of a process this has been overall in the making, some of these compacts were being discussed and designed, like the legislation for these compacts way back in 2019 or 2020. For all three of these compacts, they had their inaugural commission meetings in 2022. And then they spent the next 2 years having meetings where they would decide on rules and hire permanent directors, hire management associations to, help them stay organized, all that type of thing. And then finally, in late 2023, they decided it was time to find, to get started on the data system. And in January of 2024 is when the vendor was selected. And the vendor that we're working with is Inspiring Apps. They're actually on the call today, and you'll hear from them in a few minutes, but they've been really great to work with. So we started the actual development work for the system last May. And I just want to mention here, we've been using an agile development process, which means that every couple of weeks, our developers show to the commissions the work that they've made, the features we've worked on the last couple of weeks, and then we get feedback from the commissions as to whether or not, for instance, they may need another aspect added to the feature, or if they thought of a totally new related feature that they might need to add on, that the demonstrated feature reminded them of. And we are planning right now that in August of 2025, we'll be ready to issue privileges with the system. Now, this does depend a little bit on states, and that's why we're starting the onboarding process now. We know that this can be a big effort for states to get onboarded. And so that's why we are starting to work with you guys now, why we're trying to get information out there about the system. Yeah. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different groups involved. You guys are probably familiar with all of them, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Yeah, so we've got the three compacts that are involved, and the compact directors are the ones that are the most involved and are able to, attend the most meetings and give the most feedback. But we do also talk to the executive committees of these compacts as well as the compact commissions. In the future, it's also possible that there may be more compacts who want to use the system, and we're open to that. Part of the system has also been funded through a cooperative agreement that the Council of State Governments has with the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense has worked on building a number of other compacts that are also going to need data systems. And so, yeah, we're open to those compacts, using this system. Another important group is the majority of you on the call, the member states who are members of those three compacts. So we do really value your participation in this process. I've had calls probably with I actually don't have an exact number. I think probably with at least like 20 different states to talk about the data system and get feedback from them. And those calls are always really helpful. So we definitely want to make sure we're hearing from you. And we do have a good chunk of time at the end of this call when we will be answering your questions. So the way that the presentation is set up is that we'll have probably about 40 minutes of presentation and demo, and then we will have a good chunk of time for questions. Okay. So next, the Council of State Governments is involved in this project, as I mentioned, partially through the DoD cooperative agreement and partially in kind of this management role, since there are three compacts all working together on the project. And then another group that's very important is the vendor that we're working with, Inspiring Apps, and we'll actually hear from them now. Okay.
Thanks, Isabel. I'm Brad Weber. I'm the founder of Inspiring Apps. And although it's my picture and name on the slide, I want to make it clear that this is absolutely a team effort from our group. We've got a great team of designers, developers, QA, and project managers working on it. We're thrilled to be a part of it. We're really excited about what has been created so far that Isabel is going to demo for you later. It's very important to our team that you have a secure and easy way to submit your data to the system. That's ultimately what's going to bring it to life. So this is an important milestone for us, and I'm thrilled to see the number of participants on this call today to really get this kicked off and get the states onboarded. So we have members of our team here to answer your questions in the section that Isabel had referenced.
All right, thank you so much, Brad. Yeah, as Brad mentioned, there's actually a really incredible number of people on the call today. Yesterday, when I checked the registration, I think there were about 80 people registered. So the fact that we're well over that number is really incredible. Okay, so yeah, next, the next part of the rest of the presentation really will be about the steps in the onboarding process, what your state will be doing, and then after that, we'll have the demo. Okay, so from my perspective, once your state becomes a member of the compact, you are kind of somewhere on the you've started the onboarding process. Basically, becoming a member state of the compact is that first step. And at first, you'll probably start out by talking to the compact director and appointing a commissioner to the compact commission and just becoming familiar with the compact. But eventually, once you're on board, in that sense, then we can start getting into the onboarding of the data with Compact Connect. So the way that this has happened so far for the states that I've been working with and the boards that I've been talking to, typically we'll have an administrative call where we kind of talk through various more administrative type of concerns, like for instance, how would the background check be handled, and I'll discuss that more later in the presentation. And then states will often also have a technical call where a member of the development team will be on the call with state IT staff. And even in some cases, if you all use like an external vendor to supply your state licensing system, then sometimes members of that vendor are on the call as well. So that can help, hammer out the technical details. And it may also happen that you need more than one call, and that's just fine. Okay, so after that, then we're able to get you set up in the test environment. So this is when administrators who will be, using the actual system are given test accounts, and they can go in and click around and see if things work, see if things don't work. And if things don't work, then we want to hear about them so we know to fix them. Then eventually states will move from the test environment to the production environment. And this is where you can put real data and, the information will be at the most secure level. And then after we have some states that are in the production environment and things are working well and we're comfortable, then that's when we'll be able to launch. And I do want to mention, we know that not every state will be ready at the same time. So the date when your state, kind of officially launches and becomes a state that's issuing privileges, that's going to be something you determine alongside the compact director. You won't be, you of course will not be asked to or forced to start on a certain date. We want everything to be in place and working very smoothly before we do that. And we know for some states, this date might be years from now. I've heard from a couple of states that, for instance, in order to get, there's a certain rule that they need in place, but in order to get that rule in place, they also have to make a legislative change. And so, that will be probably more than a year, depending on how successful the legislative change can be. Like if it's able to happen during the current legislative session or if it has to happen during a future legislative session. Yeah, so just wanted to mention that, we're working with states on that. And I also want to mention the system is still under construction. So there will be a few times in the demo today where I point out things that are actually going to change, things that we already know are going to change, but there are probably going to be a number of things that change and we just don't know it yet. And of course, this is true of all software, from time to time, everything gets updated. Like today when I was logging onto Zoom, there were a couple of changes I hadn't encountered before, and it took me a minute to figure out how to share my screen. But because the system is under development, the changes might be a little bit bigger than what you're used to. So I just wanted to mention that, if you're coming back to look at this recording sometime in the future and things aren't the same anymore, then that's probably why. Okay, so the main, I guess the technical way that we will make sure your state's data is kind of stored in our system is through a state configuration file. And in this file, we need a couple pieces of information. The first will be your state fee. And I do want to take a moment to point out here that there's just one fee from your state, for instance, or sorry, I guess for your state per compact. So for instance, we anticipate that, in one state, the counseling board will charge a certain fee for counseling privileges and that the OT board would charge a certain fee for OT privileges. But there's not the option, for instance, to charge OTs one fee and OTAs another fee. There's also not the option to charge one fee for the first time someone is issued a privilege and then charge a different fee for a renewal. So I just want to mention that. The next thing we need from your state is any jurisprudence requirements. And then finally, we'll need contact information. So there are three main ways right now that you would be contacted through the system. The first is when an adverse action occurs against somebody who is practicing in your state. We want to make sure you're notified about that. So you'll put in contact information for a person or people who need to receive that notification. The next is reports. So reports mainly include information about who has purchased a privilege in your state and then the financial component. And then operations are for mainly, if a data upload fails or doesn't process correctly or something like that, then we would have those operation notifications. Now, there's the option to have this information sent out to multiple people. But what we recommend is that you use either a group inbox or a distribution list. And that way, if you ever need to make changes, you don't have to kind of, talk to the developers to make it happen. It can just be a quick turnaround on your end. All right. There are a couple of staff roles that are available in the system. So I'll go over those now. First is, well, yeah, I guess they're not really roles, they're more like permission levels. So first is read permission. This is a person who can read non-private data. So this would include things like your name, your license number, phone, email, that type of thing. And next we have an access level called read private data. So this includes someone who can see the information that we have marked as private, which includes the last four of the social security number and the date of birth. Then we have a very exclusive permission level that I think it's not going to be given out very frequently. Right now, We mostly anticipate that it could be compact executive directors who need this. And this is the ability to read the full social security number. But most of the time, that's just not going to be something that is possible to do through the system. All right. Then the next permission level is the write permission level. So this is a person who can upload state data, like the licensee data. And I think it's on the next slide. We kind of go over what those specific items are. And then we have the administrative level. So this is somebody who can add, edit, or delete users and user permissions. Okay, so this is all the information that we are currently asking you to provide on licensees. Most of this is probably going to be familiar. There are a couple that I think will be unfamiliar, and we'll talk about those in detail on the next slide. But for now, I'll just take a moment to read over all of the data points that we are asking for licensees. All right, so the required items include first name, last name, social security number, date of birth, address, and there are a couple of different components to this. Date that the license was issued, the date the license was renewed, the date it expires. And then here, the next three items are ones that we'll talk about on the next slide. So we'll explain them more there, but they include license type, license status, and eligibility status. Then we have a couple of items that are optional. These are made optional because we know that maybe not every state requires them, or not every practitioner provides them. And so this includes middle name, suffix of a name, the second line of an address, phone, email, license number, and NPI. All right, so license type and license status. And eligibility status, sorry, the eligibility status is very new. So eligibility status refers to whether somebody is eligible to buy compact privileges based on that license, or if they're not eligible. So this is, probably a field that will be new in a lot of states. But it's very important to determine this at the state level because, the compact administrators just don't have the authority to decide whether or not somebody is eligible to participate in the compact. That's something that the state will have to do. All right, next we have the license types. So for the ASLP compact, the license types are audiologist and speech language pathologist. Next, for the OT compact, we have occupational therapist and occupational therapy assistant. And finally, for counseling compact, there's just one type. It's called licensed professional counselor. Now, I know not every state uses this same term, but because the counseling compact uses this term in their definitions, then that's the one we went with here. All right, license status. Now, I think this one might be more familiar to you all. But it's a little bit complicated for us to add in the system. And we just recently figured out that it was something we definitely wanted to include. So we know that states, might have like 30 or more different license status options that a license could be in. And so we're kind of trying to figure out exactly how we want the system to show this information. All right. So now I'm going to talk briefly about the criminal background check situation. This is unfortunately quite complicated, and I know some states have been frustrated with the situation. Some states luckily already have one in place, and if you do, that's excellent for your licensees in terms of whether they want to use the compact. If you're a state that does not have the background check in place, then one thing that's good for you to know is occasionally it may be harder to get the FBI to approve that language if the background check is specifically being done on those who want to use the compact. Now, the compact language itself only requires those who want to use the compact to have the background check. The compact law doesn't say that your state has to do background check on everyone. The compact only cares that the background check is done on those who want to use the compact. But unfortunately, sometimes it's just easier to get the language approved if you do it for all licensees. I don't think this is always the case. Another part of this that has been really frustrating is it seems I think there's an example of even in South Carolina, like within the same state, two boards submitted the same language and one board was approved and one board was denied. So anyway, yeah, this is just a bit of a frustrating process. And because it's been really complicated, some of the compacts are considering kind of doing a grandfathering or a delayed rollout of this part of the compact. Now for the counseling compact, that's not the case. So if you are working with the counseling compact, or if you're, a provider who wants to use the counseling compact, you definitely have to have a background check. But for the ASLP and OT compacts, they are kind of looking into potentially delaying this requirement for a little while. I think right now the current idea that's being discussed is that um, if your state has tried to get an ORI and you have proof that you've owned a Holly, I see you raised your hand. Do you want to just talk about this?
Yes, if you don't mind, Isabel, I'll just speak
I
real
would
brief.
love for you to talk about this. Please go
Thank
ahead.
you. I'm sorry. Yeah, so just a few nuanced additions to this. It's not necessarily just legacy or grandfathering that we're talking about. And it may not even be grandfathering that we're talking about. At least one of the commissions has agreed in principle that, and that's occupational therapy, that we may address the concern that all states are having that they cannot get an ORI number, which is what is issued by the FBI to enable a member state board to receive CBC background checks. Because of that frustration, I think probably I've read the list of participants. Almost all of you know this, but just generally, we're seeing a lot of problems with that. So, we are considering in occupational therapy the notion that because, at least for now, the FBI has made it a legal impossibility for some states who do not already have background checks in place to comply with this compact requirement, that we will simply say, member state, have you attempted to comply, meaning have you applied for an ORI number, which would enable you to see the FBI criminal background checks. Um, if you have complied and you have been rejected, then it has become a legal impossibility for you to fulfill that. Now, I want to be very clear here. If we choose that, if OT votes that through, Occupational Therapy Compact Commission votes that through, then what that means is once it does become a possibility for you to fulfill that requirement within the compact, then some action will be taken. What remains to be seen is at what juncture the commissions will expect, meaning the OT Compact Commission and the ASLP Compact Commission, at what juncture will we expect for FBI CBCs to be performed if possible? Could be at renewal cycle, could be one of them may say before someone applies for initial privilege, which is why um, Isabel has pointed out the fact that whether we decide to grandfather some, to delay complete compliance with that provision in the compact, which is a requirement in all three, regardless of the status of when each commission by rule determines that you have to fulfill that requirement, there will be a data field that can cover that. So Compact Connect will create a data field that enables you to feed in all of your applicable licensees, because all three of these compacts, counseling, occupational therapy, and audiology and speech language pathology, all three compacts say the same thing, that you shall report in information into the data system on all those to whom the compact is applicable. So it's interesting. Some states have said, well, to me, it's only applicable to those who are currently eligible. And some states have said, to me, it is though it's applicable to all those who are licensees, because they may become eligible in a matter of moments. They may meet the FBI CBC requirement. They may clear an adverse action in a manner consistent with the compacts, such that then they are now eligible. So many states see it as an efficiency to load in all licensees, because they believe that is the pool of people to whom the compact is applicable, and then just check the eligibility box as they become eligible. So that the plan as of now is to provide for either one of those states. If some states say we're only going to feed in those to whom it's eligible, we would like to at least attempt to accommodate for that, many administrators are like, that's too much work. We need to upload all of the licensees. I know at least in the counseling compact commission, there's been discussion that they feel that it would frustrate the purpose of the compact not to load in all licensees and then just check that box as to whether or not it's eligible. More to come on that. This all continues to be built out by rule, which is why commissions have to have rulemaking authority. But in terms of what you need to know with regard to the data system, there will be a field that will enable, at least for now, either one of those realities, that you feed in those who are eligible right now, or you feed in those who could become eligible because it could be applicable to them. And obviously, we want to move swiftly. We don't want to delay the ability to issue a privilege, and that's part of why these compacts are have been seen as a better pathway than traditional licensure. I hope that's helpful. I know there are lots of questions. And I'm eager to answer all of them because I have points on all of them, but we may save that to the end because I don't want to take too much time on the CBCs away from the Compact Connect discussion. But we have answers for these. We will cover all of them. We'll just go through them at the end. Thank you.
Yep, we'll definitely have lots of time at the end. I think probably at least 30 minutes for questions. So we're really going to try to get to all the questions that we have. And yeah, so feel free to just save those for the end. I also do want to mention, many of you are probably familiar with Nahali, but for those of you who are not, she's the legal counsel for all three of the commissions involved in this project. So that's why she's able to speak so knowledgeably about this topic. I also want to mention what's perhaps the one good thing about the criminal background check situation is that regardless of the way each commission decides to handle it, the data system will be able to, manage that, whatever the outcome of that decision is. All right, and now we're going to have one of our developers at Inspiring Apps talk a little bit about the security of the system.
Hi, I'm Justin Fromm on Inspiring Apps. And so in the interest of just talking about the security of this system, I can just lay out some basics. Obviously, there's a very nuanced topic, but for this audience, we can keep it to, I think, the most common questions that we have. Our data is always encrypted at rest. It is always encrypted in transit. So that means anytime that we are communicating to or from the states or users that encryption is happening as the data is transmitted. We also have a lot of access controls around a lot of the data, the social security numbers being the most sensitive data that we store. It is separate in a separate database that is restricted. So that way the risk surface of exposing that number is reduced. We have, as Isabel mentioned, a dedicated permission so that only individuals that are explicitly granted permission to read a full social security number can read that full social security number. And then we have, other general security measures like requiring multi-factor authentication for staff users who will have ability to read data out of the system. And then we have access logging and alerting across the system to monitor activity and alert on things that we expect would be suspicious and abnormal behavior.
All right, thank you, Justin. That's really helpful. And so I think probably a lot of people on this call are state administrators and might not have technical questions, but for those of you who are, more technically literate about this type of thing, we can also answer questions about this at the end of the call or anything related. Okay, so this is the last slide of the presentation portion, and then we'll get on to the demo. So this is basically a summary of the actions that you as a state will need to take in order to get onboarded. These are the main things that we think would probably take a while in some states. So first of all, the criminal background check. I don't think we really need to rehash that one since we just talked about it. Next is deciding a fee. This one typically I think happens through rulemaking in many states, but occasionally it may also require a legislative change. So this is one that can take a while as well. And if you're a state where it might take a while, especially a state where it requires a legislative change, then it would probably be good for you to start looking into this so that you can all decide a fee. Next is a state license based on a privilege to practice. This one is a little bit niche, I suppose. It's mentioned in the law of the compact, but it doesn't come up in conversation that much. But one thing that the compact requires is, sorry, actually, this is only true for the OT compact and the counseling compact. So it's not true for the ASLP compact. But the OT compact and the counseling compact create, they ask states to create an additional pathway to licensure that's based on the privilege to practice. So, for instance, if I live in Kentucky right now, let's say I were to move to Tennessee and I wanted to get, they're both in the compact, and I wanted to get I would need to get a new home state license in Tennessee after I moved. If I already had a privilege in Tennessee, so Tennessee knows I've been practicing there for a while, then the license could be based upon that privilege to practice since I'm already able to practice in Tennessee. So I think most states, actually, I'm not aware of any states that have really started to work on this process. So it's something that you might want to look into and might be good to have discussions about. Okay. Each state will also sign a data sharing agreement with the commission. And then lastly, there will be testing in the various environments and, making sure staff users are comfortable with the system and that, they understand how it works and all that. Yeah, and those will be the main actions that a state needs to take. And now we'll go ahead and have the demo. So I'll stop sharing and pull up my browser so we can look at the system. Okay. So this is the main landing page right now that we have where you can access a number of different parts of Compact Connect. As you can see here, there's the option to log in as a staff person, log in as a provider, or register as a provider. Eventually, we'll also have the option to access a public lookup page from here. So a page where you don't need to have a user account. You can picture it as similar to licensure lookup pages for states. All right, so we'll start off taking a look at the staff view. When you first create your account, you will be sent a temporary password that you can use to log in that first time, and then you'll be asked to change it to a permanent password. When you log in, you're first taken to a search page, and the search page you have the option to search, but we're with a couple of different fields. Right now, we're looking into adding a few more, such as license number. Social security number is going to be removed from this page, so that's not going to be an option in the future. It was something that we considered early on, and we are just cleaning it up at this point. And the same here, we will not be displaying the social security number. But anyway, when you go into a search, you'll be able to see, there's going to be like a list view with basic information. So this includes first name, last name, the home state, privileges that the person has purchased, and whether they're active or inactive. So as you can see here, nobody's purchased any privileges, but that's because, this is all fake data. Nobody has a real login, and nobody has, paid any money for their privileges. So when you click on a user from the list view, you'll also be able to see the detailed view. Now, this is another page where we're going to have some changes coming in the next couple of weeks. For instance, the social security number is going to be removed. The driver's license number is going to be removed because that information is not being collected anymore. But on this page, you can see the person's personal information. So this includes stuff like their home state and address. It includes information on where they have licenses. So their home state, again, you can see here is Kentucky, and they have licenses in Kentucky and Wisconsin. So this is an important function of the system. While you can only have one home state, we know that it may happen that somebody has a license in another state and then they just never bother to update personal information. They've kept the license active. And so we wanted the system to be able to handle, that somebody may have multiple licenses. Okay, so if you come down here, you can see a list of all the licenses that this licensee has. You'll see here, there are actually 2 additional licenses, but they're expired. And then there's the Kentucky license and the Wisconsin license. And if this person did have any privileges, you would be able to view them down here. Okay. All right, next we'll go to the upload data page. So this is a page you'll only have access to if you have the ability to, if you have the permission type of write data or of write. So Additionally, one thing that's really useful about this page is my account has the ability to write data only for the state of Kentucky. So as you can see here, I don't even have the option to upload data for another state. All right, another thing you might notice about this page is that we ask you to upload a CSV. We heard feedback from a lot of states that they would really like for the process to be more automated than simply coming in and adding a file and having to do that every week. So we are working on an automated process. I think that will be available. We're getting close to finishing up the development aspect of it, but we'll need to kind of like integrate it into the system. So it'll probably be maybe a few more weeks before states would be able to test that function. But yeah, that's coming up in the pipeline pretty soon because we heard that it was really important for states to have. Okay, then the next function is the ability to manage users. So this is a function that you'll have if you are an admin level. So as you can see here on my account, I have access in Kentucky. And then I have, if I were to like, I don't know, lose my password or something and I needed to get an invitation reissued, this is a page where you could do that. So you can resend the invite. My permissions or permissions of other accounts could also be edited from this page, and an account could also be deactivated. And then we have the option to invite a new user. So you'll need their name, email, and then you would enter their permission type down here. Okay, so the compact settings, this is a page you'll only have access to as a compact administrator. So we won't go over that on this call since most people here wouldn't have access to that. Actually, I think maybe nobody on this call would have access to that because I believe our two compact administrators are not available right now. Okay. And then I'm going to go down to, so this option here will show up only if you have the ability, only if you've been added to multiple compacts. So we know that in some states, we might have one person who oversees both audiology and speech language pathology as well as occupational therapy. This happens, in certain states. And so we wanted them to be able to toggle between the different systems, but without having to, totally log out. So we can go down and see that. And one thing that you'll notice here is my account on this, on the OT site does not have permissions in Kentucky. And so I don't even have the option to add data. All right, so other than that, you can pretty much, well, there's an account page, so I guess you can briefly visit that. This is just to like update your password pretty much. And now we can log out and we'll take a look at the practitioner workflow. Excuse me. Okay, so from the provider end of things, first you'll need to register and get your account set up. So this is what this is our process for basically matching data that a state has provided to the data that the practitioner is entering here, because we want to, make sure that when that provider logs in, they're being matched with the appropriate license. So we ask them to provide their first name, last name, an email address, and this actually can be any email address. It's just where we're going to send their account login information. Then they'll also provide last four of the social, date of birth, and then they'll select their home state. And then they select the license type from that. And those are the pieces of information we'll use to match their account. So after they request the account, a temporary login will be provided, and then they'll go through and set up a permanent login. And now we can use my test practitioner account to kind of see what that looks like. All right, so the main way a practitioner will be using the system is to buy privileges. I'll walk through that in a minute. But yeah, so as you can see here, I have one active license. It's active in Minnesota. Minnesota is my home state. Now, you guys are probably familiar with this, but the compact has certain benefits for those who have military status. And military status refers to someone who either is an active duty member of the military or the spouse of someone who is. And so in order to verify your military status, you'll be asked to upload documents, and each compact commission will kind of explain what documents those are. But anyway, this is where a practitioner would be able to provide that information. And And then, yeah, so if I already had bought privileges, the privileges would show up down here. But this is just a test account, so I don't have any privileges, but I can go ahead and walk through the privilege workflow now. And this will be the last item on the demo. And then we can go ahead and get to all the questions that you guys have. So sorry about that. All right, so there are a couple of steps in the privilege purchase process. The first step is you'll come in here and you'll be asked to confirm your personal information. So all of this information is just information that has been provided to you, to the system by your home state. And then you'll kind of be asked to attest that this is true, and attest that you're a resident of that state. And then we have some information down here about how the information was provided by the home state. Okay. Then that brings us to the next page, and this is the page where you'll be able to select privileges. So eventually, this page will show privileges from like 30 different states or maybe 40 different states for some of you, depending on how big your compact is. And you select the state you want to buy privileges in, and you can buy privileges in more than one state at a time if you want. And when you do that, it'll show you some information here. So it'll show you the expiration date. This expiration date is pulled from your license. So the same day that your license expires, your privilege will also expire. Then you'll also be assessed a fee, a state fee. This is jurisdiction right now. Eventually, we're going to change it to say state. But each state, so this is where your state fee will be shown to someone who's buying a privilege in your state. And then we have a compact fee. So each compact will also set a fee. We call it the administrative fee because, it's pretty much just to help keep the compact up and running. And then you also have to do attestations. So if this state has a jurisprudence exam, you have to attest that you've completed the jurisprudence exam. And we also have an attestation related to scope of practice because we know that the scope of practice is not the same in every state. And we just want to make sure practitioners are aware that they're obliged to follow the scope of practice in the state where they have a privilege. Okay, then we have a page of a couple more attestations, just things that we want to make sure to confirm. So the first one is we ask about investigations. It's the case that, we would not prevent someone from getting a privilege if they did have an active investigation. So if they selected that they had an active investigation ongoing, they would still be able to get a privilege. But it's just nice for us to know about that. Then they'll be asked to confirm that they don't have discipline. And then also the compact says that even after a discipline period has ended, like if you've completed all the requirements and everything, you still have to wait another 2 years before you can participate in the compact. So we ask them to attest to that as well. And then generally just to attest they've, provided true information in the application. And then that takes us to the last page. I'm obviously not going to purchase your privileges or put in a credit card number, but it's a pretty standard checkout page. And after you put all of this information in, you would be able to complete the purchase there. All right, so I think that takes us through a pretty good demonstration of the system. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I see that we have a ton of questions in the chat. And Holly, I think you mentioned you might want to start answering some of these. I haven't had the chance to read any of them, so I would be happy to defer to you if you wanted to take some of them.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I see that Justin, thank you, Justin, has answered at least one of the questions. Justin, do you mind restating the question and explaining your answer for the group, and then I'll launch into the other ones.
Yeah, so the question was, will we need a separate password for each board? For example, if they have an OT, SLP, and counseling, would they need different logins for each? And the answer is no. So as Isabel showed, when you log in as a staff user, you do have the ability to toggle which board you are representing. On the left, there's a little drop down. So you'll just pick the board that you're working with at that particular moment, and you can toggle between them all with a single user.
And just by way of reminder, just because you can toggle and change doesn't mean that we don't have the security measures in place to ensure that each profession is firewalled from the other. Is I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but can Justin or Isabel just speak to that a little bit, the security ability to, just firewall that off one from the other
Yep.
profession?
Yeah, sure. So the entire system is basically designed to have data between compacts partitioned in such a way that you are always working on behalf of and viewing data for one particular compact at a time. You can only request data for one compact. You can only write data for one compact, and you are always explicitly working under that particular compact. That's why that dropdown is right there on the navigation pane, so that you're kind of switching between different partitions for the whole system.
That's helpful. Thank you. We have meetings at least once, sometimes twice, sometimes three times weekly, as with your representatives from each commission, which are the executive directors or interim executive directors, with Isabel and with the team at IA at least every 2 weeks, sometimes more often for the sprint reviews. We are routinely given and we're routinely given a I forget what the acronym QASP stands for, quality assurance something. Can you help, Carl?
Quality assurance surveillance plan.
So we're always checking. We have an IT person who is has been employed for the benefit of review of code by IA, but whose direct report is really to this tripartite commission and our partners. And that IT leader essentially says, "Here's where we stand. Here's our ranking on all of these security protocols." So I say that because that has been a question from some of the states. So I want to give you a comfort feel on that we recognize deeply how important security is. And so that's important. I will start with the first question.
I think the first question that we haven't answered is from Susan. So she was asking, if you scroll up closer to the top, she was asking, are we providing data for licensees who are not eligible for compact privileges?
Right.
So this is an important question. And what we have heard talking to states is that some states seem to be prohibited from sharing, more data than, for instance, licensees who are interested in using the compact. However, the alternate point of view is that providing information on as many licensees as you possibly can is going to really improve public protection. So, like, for instance, you can think of somebody who has had an adverse action against a license in your state, but isn't pursuing a compact privilege. But that adverse action against the license in your state actually means they're not eligible to participate in the compact. So the information can be considered relevant depending on your point of view. That being said, I think I think it's yeah, go on, no, Holly.
And maybe more importantly, I think, is the idea that many administrators have said the difference in us feeding in uh, all licensees because the compact either is applicable to them because they are eligible or may become eligible. The reason we hear many administrators and even one commission has gone so far as to say we feel like you may not be in compliance if you're not feeding all of those licensees in. The reason for that is the compact itself states in its purpose to have ease. Uh, Obviously, we want the efficiency of fast issuance of licensure. If you're having to go through and sort, that may quite slow down the process. Having said that, we have repeatedly in this development, because we are still developing, in this development phase, we've said our ideal would be that the system works for both of those situations, wherein a state says, I'm okay with taking the administrative time to handpick those who are eligible now, enter them up, and know that I may be, pushed by the compact to move more quickly in determining other eligibility. But we want to allow for the most broad availability, not, to not prohibit feeding in all of the licensees to whom the compact is applicable. Who's the compact applicable to? Well, in plain meaning, it's applicable to licensees. Are they eligible or not? No. So I think it's a fair question by Susan to say, but is it applicable if they're not eligible? So what I'm trying to say is we want the system to accommodate both of those scenarios. It is up to each commission to determine whether or not you're in compliance by only feeding in those who are eligible right this second or not. I know that all three of the commissions are interested in accommodating states where they stand about how they interpret that. But your rules committee, which will have to promulgate a rule that the full commission votes on, goes out for public comment, will get a little more detailed in that information. As API, which I know many states do not have API capability, that's fine. That's not where we are. The system isn't there yet. It's CSV upload, and we're not that different than other much longer existing commissions do not have API capability right now, but are working toward it. We will work toward it. But when we do get to that API component part, obviously administrators would say, "Ooh, it'd be lovely if we can just feed in all licensees." So I've probably taken too much time, but Susan, I hope that helped a little bit. More to watch, but we're trying to build the system in a way that accommodates these differing perspectives on who the compact is applicable to. Next
So
question.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I can kind of run the questions and bring them up to you or answer ones that may be relevant, better for me to answer. But people have done a really great job of answering questions in the chat, so thank you so much for that. The next question that I think we have not really answered or only briefly answered was, will the database facilitate the completion of jurisprudence exams, or is it only requiring the applicants to attest that the jurisprudence exams are completed? Could you talk about that one a little bit?
I believe for right now that is something that member states are going to have to follow up on. There is a stop point though if someone were to, well, Isabel, I might need your
I
input.
can talk. So if somebody doesn't attest that they, have completed jurisprudence exam, if they want to skip that attestation, they won't be able to move on to the next page. So, they need to have completed the jurisprudence exam so that they can, truthfully attest. But we don't have a built-in like page where you can go and take the exam or anything. And part of the reason for this is that states have really different requirements set up. So like, for instance, some states have to go in and add you as a potential privilege seeker, I guess, to the system so that you are enabled to take it. Whereas some states, don't really have such a registration process. And so, the system right now isn't really able to accommodate anything particularly complex right there. But Nahali, if you want to talk about it more, you can.
And just in terms of how that's working with other commissions, yeah, it can be problematic with other commissions, but in terms of a minimally viable product with our system to get us launched and to continue to work to build out these additional features, which we'll continue to do that as long as we can financially. That does not seem to be the most important. So there will be some member state follow-up that is required. Obviously, people attest to things that are untruthful all the time. But I still do work as a prosecutor for a state board, so I can say that if you have an untruthful attestation, then you have the pathway toward a disciplinary action. If this is actually a bad actor, there are many instances where someone's just, is not a bad actor, is misinformed, underinformed, something of that nature. But there will be some work to be done by the member states just to confirm that jurisprudence was done. And again, there really is very little uniformity on how jurisprudence occurs with certainly within all the three professions and even within the three professions within the states. Like some are, as Isabel explained. So there's no real way to capture that without building out weeks and weeks of code to try to create all those different certainties. So for now, we're going to take the attestation. We're going to rely on the states to confirm that that's true for the largest part, but we will move towards something better as time goes by. Okay, you have the next question, Isabel?
Yes, I do. All right, so then the next question relates to a couple of states have thought so far that they would be able to put two fees into place. And they're asking about that. So Nahali, would you be able to talk about that at all?
Yes, so the only thing that the compacts address are a state fee, which is your fee if you're a remote state, meaning you're not the home state. If you're a remote state that someone is wanting to practice into, so they're picking your state as a state in which they wish to exercise the privilege to practice. You may assess them a state fee for that. It is your state fee. They will be assessed pursuant to the compact authority, an administrative fee that goes to the compact commission. And the reason the compact commission needs those fees is that's how they fund their administration, their executive director, their secretariat, insurance, provision of insurance, et cetera, the cost that it takes to run a commission. At least none of these three commissions are guaranteed eternal funding from their current funding sources. The funding sources have been incredibly generous and have gotten us on our feet. We hope to continue to have some measure of funding, but not one of the three tripartite commissions can be guaranteed funding forever. So they do need to generate their own funding through this administrative fee. State fee, the commission doesn't tell you what you have to set that at. We don't have that authority. The commission only has the authority to set the administrative fee that comes to the commission. We will be sending out some suggested fees. I think this probably feels pretty logical to most on this call that we would hope that the fee that the state sets certainly doesn't exceed what a single state license fee would be. We would hope, but we can't ultimately dictate that. That's up to each state. That's your sovereign right to determine what that fee is. When these privileges all renew in accordance with the home state license renewal. So as someone goes to renew their home state license on whatever tract it is, for some it's one every year, for some it's every 2 years, whatever that renewal cycle is, when you renew your home state license, that's when you can renew your privileges. So the renewal of the privilege, you're entitled to ask for a fee there, for a renewal of that privilege fee. So it's not a one-time fee to get a privilege in a state. You may charge a renewal fee when someone goes to renew that privilege to practice in a remote state. As for home states, I just spoke about the remote states, not where the person lives, but the states that they wish to practice into. As for home states, that's within your jurisdiction. You are the home state. You charge the fee you want to charge. If that I think for many people that looks like the home state license fee that you currently require now, maybe for a single state license fee, same as to renewals. So I hope that answered the question. If it didn't, please put in chat if that didn't answer the question.
All right, thanks, Nahali. That's really helpful. So I'll answer this next question. We got two questions, so sort of asking about, from the state perspective, so some states are, if they get questions about, does this person really have a privilege? How do I verify that? Then they would direct the person asking that to the public lookup, and the system will have a public lookup function. Some states, however, want to input that practitioner information into their system. And obviously doing this by hand is very painful. So we have questions from two people in the chat about that process. So right now, there's not an automated process that we've built to take information about those who have privileges in your state and automatically feed it into a state system. Again, this is something that not every state needs. So it's something that we might develop in the future, depending on how much demand there is for it. But right now, it's not a feature that we have. And then we also had a question about a comment that in Tennessee, there's not a new pathway to licensure based on a privilege to practice. Nahali, I'm wondering, does the compact require states to develop that pathway? I feel like it might be required in a section of the compact, like license based on a privilege to practice. Do you happen to recall that?
So the two commissions that have you're talking about a new home state license based on the existing privilege. The two compacts that have that, again, are occupational therapy and counseling. The first compact it appeared in, obtaining a new home state license by virtue of a compact privilege, was occupational therapy, then counseling. Many of the compact commissions after that, or compacts after there, have also included that section. Some of the existing compacts, like nursing, have adopted it by rule because it was a Department of Defense suggested section to include. So there currently occupational therapy is building out a rule to explain that process. of how you obtain a new home state license by virtue of a privilege. But the general concept behind it and how all of the rules will figure, at least I'll speak to my two with regard to counseling and occupational therapy, will track with the idea that if you already are in good standing in the compact portal and you are merely switching from one member home state to getting a change of residency to another member home state where you already had a privilege to practice, that should be an easier process than going through a whole new regular traditional home state licensure pathway. That those discussions are in infancy. The conversation just began in the last occupational therapy rules committee meeting. So please keep us posted on that. We would like to have your thoughts on what that should look like. But, if all will look to the sections in occupational therapy and counseling, it's section 5, so it's funny, I was just looking at this. I believe it's section 5 in occupational therapy. And it does spell out quite a bit about, the fact that it will be easier because you may not necessarily have to re-provide primary source documentation, transcripts, things of that nature, the things that home states typically vet, because that's already living in the data system pursuant to what the vetting of that has already occurred, and the fact that it occurred is already checked in the data system by the previous home state. A new FBI CBC can be required. A new jurisprudence can be required. A new fee can be required. So there you'll see within Section 5 in occupational therapy that it really kind of lays that out. I actually would like to get more into that, but I don't want to take too much time for the other questions. But anyone's welcome, offline. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more.
I think, and we may have some time at the end, I think, to talk about that. If if we have time, maybe we can circle back to that. Okay. Next, I'll answer a question from Susan. So this is, can a state add an additional licensee who may become eligible once our initial list is uploaded? Yes, you certainly can. As you might recall, one of the items of information you're asked to add about each practitioner is whether they're eligible or not eligible. So in this case, you could add someone, but they would be marked as ineligible. And then eventually, once they became eligible, you could go in, mark them as eligible, and then, they'd be able to use the compact as a fully eligible participant.
I think we have some FBI CBC issues to clarify as well.
Also, Justin, if you could take a look at the question in the chat from Tim Ogg, I think you would probably be the appropriate person to answer that question. But Nahali, if you want to go ahead and talk about the CBCs, then I think that would be.
Sure. So we had a question about what if the individual requests the background check and not the state board? Is that acceptable? My understanding of the process, and we have many administrators on this call, so feel free to clarify for me, is that the CBC, pursuant to the compact, that cost to request the CBC is passed on to the licensee who wishes to enter the compact portal. They have to do something affirmative in that they go and get their fingerprint card done. Who knows what other biometric measure there may be in the future or even now in some states, but they have to affirmatively go request that. But the request is that it be directly sent to the board. The member state board must have an ORI number, which you've heard us talking about, in order to have permission to directly receive that criminal background check, that FBI criminal background check that has been requested of the person. What a board can't do is have, for instance, some people get CBCs for their employers, right? Or something of that nature. That can't work. It has to be a CBC that comes directly to the board that was for the purpose of the board, because it's for the purpose of making regulatory decisions. The decisions of an employer or the chain of possession just following with the licensee doesn't work. It's got to come directly to the board for the purpose of making a regulatory determination. You're not, as a member state board, you're not sharing any of the details of that. You're just promising that you will look at it, look to see, are there any concerns that have a nexus to this practice? We will give some guidance on that too. There's some great rubrics out there. Is there something within this criminal history that gives us pause, that says there's a nexus here to the practice that could create a public protection concern, because that's why we're all here. And so based on that, you determine whether or not that person is eligible to enter the compact portal. It's illegal to share any of that criminal history, so you will not be sharing that. You will be making that member state determination on your own, and then entering that data field as to eligible or ineligible based on your review as the home member state. That licensee only does that in the home member state. They don't do it in every other remote privileged state.
All right, I see we've got, let's see, I think the next question that I want to address is the one at the very bottom. So the question is, why does the privileged state not have the ability to know the nature of the complaint to prevent problems once the privilege is granted? So I'm not sure if this is referring to the investigation. We actually didn't talk about this earlier. I had a slide after the demo slide that I didn't remember to pull up, where I explained that one of the really big features that we still actually have to develop completely is the ability to input adverse action information into the system. So when there's an adverse action that has been like fully, I guess, adjudicated, like the decision has been made, the license is encumbered, whatever, that information will be entered by a state into the system. And then any other state where that person is practicing will receive a notification about it. So you will be receiving information about adverse actions. Investigations, because they're not decided, tend to be much more, states don't always like to share that type of information. And so that's why we're not collecting it in the system. But if you learned about an investigation that was happening, you could certainly reach out to that other state and ask, is this something serious? Should we try to suspend their license until whatever, until the answer is decided, anything like that. So, we don't prevent you from doing that, but it's just not something that happens through the system because investigations are, not definitive until the answer has been fully decided.
And I'm not sure that fully answered your question, Dr. Collada, but just to pile on, the existence of current significant investigative information will be a box that's checked. In practice, in a lot of the already operationalized compacts, what happens is then someone sees that and calls over to that state. That state's AG or private counsel may say you absolutely may not discuss it because it's a pending investigation, or that state AG may say, okay, you can kind of share what it's about. The commission, let me make this statement. The commission has limited authority. The commission only exists to implement and administer the terms of the compact according to the authority granted to it by the member states who enacted the compact. So when we talk, for instance, and I'm sorry, I'm going to double back here, but when we talk about buying a privilege, the only reason you can buy a privilege is because a member state has authorized that you have the ability to buy a privilege. You don't just buy a privilege, you have the authority to buy a privilege because a member state has said, we agree to these uniform criteria for your entry into the portal. The home state that, we're all entrusting each other, the home state that has vetted the primary source documentation, gone through all of the compact requirements, even if they're in addition, even if there are extra requirements other than what that state has for its non-compact participant single state licensee. You look to the compact. If that person meets all of the uniform criteria, then the home state says, okay, we did our job. We checked, we vetted this criteria for everyone. And then it is based on that the remote states have said, you may now have the privilege. Well, what's the additional thing? Of course, the additional thing would be a jurisprudence exam, because the remote states have said, well, maybe I have a jurisprudence exam. You have to do that too. Or maybe a state says, if you're going to engage in this additional type of practice, like some sort of specialized practice, we may have a scope of practice requirement that you have to meet in our state in order to engage in that. That this is all incumbent on the licensee. They must know and abide by the scope of practice requirements of each member state in which they wish to practice. So there is a duty on each licensee to confirm that they are acting in accordance with what the scope of practice is for that state. The commission itself can't vet information. It has to receive information from the member states and then act in accordance with the compact. We want to create as many efficiencies and ease for administrators as we can. We will continue to try to build that out, but there are some things that only the member states can authorize, do, share. And for instance, that issue with if it's at a status of investigation only, just based on the language within these three compacts, there's no prohibition to keep someone from actually becoming eligible for a compact, even if they're under current investigation. There's nothing in these three compacts to keep you from getting that until it becomes an actual adjudicated encumbrance on your home state license. I made that more difficult than it needed to be. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to cover everything that I think is a question. I see that Dr. Collada has his hand up.
Yep,
Listen,
Dr. Collada.
I'm a firm believer that you're innocent until proven guilty, but in this day and age, the time it takes to do the investigation, my concern is we've had a couple of physicians who were, quote, under indictment. And when we looked very carefully at the indictments, it was clear they were going to be convicted. And my concern is if we don't know those facts, because they simply don't check that I'm under an indictment, we can't verify I'm not under indictment or I'm not under investigation. But when in reality, there were 47 patients who complained over the period of about a year and a half of improper sexual conduct because of the OT. Those are the kind of cases we'd really like to say, maybe want to issue an intent to deny, and you can prevent us any reason why we shouldn't deny you. I think we have to protect our state's citizens as well. And I think the process that we're being told here is don't worry about it until it happens. That's number one. And we have to figure out a way to do that. Number two, we would, for example, and I had a lot of technical difficulties when we first started the meeting. Am I to understand that you want all of the member states to upload in files information on all of the OTs so that you'll have it there so when somebody applies, it'll be right there for you?
Holly, do you want to take this one, or I can take part of it?
You can take it, Isabel, then I'll take the first.
Yeah,
the
perfect.
first.
Okay, so with regards to uploading information, you might also read through the chat. There was some discussion about this, but basically what we found is that some states want to share all of their practitioner information, and they want to receive all the practitioner information they possibly can because this makes for better public protection. Like, for instance, if somebody in your state did have discipline against a license and you're like, well, they're not eligible because that license is disciplined. Well, that's true, but it also means what if they have a license in another state that wasn't disciplined? And we wouldn't know about it unless we knew, we wouldn't know about the discipline in your state unless that was shared. And so by sharing the most information, we're going to be able to protect the public better. However, we know that some states have like legal restrictions and might not be able to share it, or they would want practitioners to opt in. So I think Nahali was saying earlier that commissions have discussed, like one commission might require everything to be uploaded. I think the other commissions maybe are still under discussion. It's not totally decided yet. It's a bit up in the air, but anyway, we see it from both points of view. And I think Nahali will talk a little bit more about that and answer your other question as well.
Sure. So, ideally, I saw a question or a comment in the chat. Can we connect to MPDB automatically? That's a dream. I want that. We all want that. All three commissions want that. We know that there's flow-through reporting directly to National Practitioners Data Bank and nursing. To read your comment, pharmacy also. So that is definitely something we would like in the future. We have talked about once we do, or we will begin the adverse action sprint or the adverse action work very shortly. Part of what we'll discuss in that adverse action is what do we want it to look like? Is it going to give like certain types? Is it just going to be the existence? So there will be more to come on that, and hopefully we can even upload. I don't know, Isabel, would there be intent to upload onto Compact Connect .org, the information as to what adverse action data fields will look like? Is there
Yeah,
any
so right now I have this onboarding document that everybody got before this call, and it doesn't include any information about adverse actions, but we're going to add it once we've made those decisions. So there are just a couple of things that are still up in the air. We don't exactly know how each commission will want to handle those within the system, but once we have made those decisions and we're starting to work, then we'll make sure to share that information.
And just quickly to the language, because all compacts are very similar. These three are all mutual recognition model. They have a lot of similarities, but they do have some little small nuanced differences. I would say IMLC has some fairly significant differences. IMLC being an expedited licensure model, and with obviously there being some concerns there that maybe don't live to the same degree, though I think we all can agree that public protection should exist in roughly the same degree with every allied health field. Having said that, what we have the authority by virtue of the actual compact language that has been enacted by the states and thereby is now state law, and what we are held to, because we can only draft rules that we are directly authorized to draft pursuant to the compact language, is with regard to the privilege seeker, is that they have no encumbrance on any state license. Then there's a definition for encumbrance. It doesn't include and it doesn't define a current investigation to be an encumbrance. So that's where we are a little limited in saying, if there's an investigation pending, we need to know that, and that needs to be a stopgap there. So unfortunately, the language of the compact does limit us. I mean, we're asking in the actual data system, are you currently under investigation? Why? Because if they say yes, and then we have the person's name, then we're hoping that's a way without going too far out of our authority. That's why we're not stopping them from actually getting the privilege until we know it's an actual encumbrance that's been finally adjudicated, that's been entered. So we're trying to do the pieces that we are authorized to do under the OT, the counseling, and the ASLP compact. But I recognize your concern, Dr. Collada, and you and I'd be happy to talk more offline as well.
I'd love to. I just need to know your email address, and I'll contact you.
Absolutely, Dr. Collada. And I
Thank
think
you so much.
Her
absolutely
email's in the chat. I can send it again if you can't find it. Brad, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the data upload question. You alluded to this in your demo, Isabel, but I want to make sure it was really clear that practitioners will not be able to register in the system unless their data has been uploaded by the state. So that it is a prerequisite. I realize there are questions about which practitioner should be uploaded, which should not, but know that a practitioner cannot complete the registration process until we have your data from the state.
Yeah, that's really important to highlight. Okay, so we had one question in the chat about what the reports look like. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and pull one up on the screen and we can walk through it together. All right, so you guys should be able to see that now. The report is pretty basic, and this is an example report where there was only one privilege purchased, as you can see right here. So in this report, we have the person's name, last name, their licensee ID. This is just a unique ID that the system automatically generates. The date the transaction was settled. We list out how much the state charges. So in this column, if there was more than one, it would just be the same number for all of them. The state, so this is Nebraska. So if you're in Nebraska, you would be receiving this report. The transaction ID number that's generated when they do the transaction, and then we also list the privilege ID. So this is one that's generated by the system, and as you can see, it indicates the profession, it indicates the state where they're practicing, and then we have a number as well. And then down here it'll summarize the privileges purchased and the total state amount. So it's pretty straightforward. A lot of people, I think maybe not a lot, at least 2 people in the chat mentioned wanting to know the licensee email. So we might talk about adding that into this report, if, since it sounds like that's something people are interested in. But anyway, yeah, so that's just a preview of the report. And then I think there was one more question. Okay, Nahali, so you said you answered the question about a summary suspension. Thank you for clarifying that. And thank you for answering the question about the data sharing agreement. I was gonna flag those for you. Okay.
And I'm kind of putting out a request. If you out there in the States, like I have two samples that I'm working from, so as not to completely reinvent the wheel. If you out there in the States have data sharing agreements that have previously been approved in your state that you can share with me, I'd love to see them because I want to make this agreement as inclusive as possible, or I could continue to conduct a little research to see what has worked in your state. So if you have one you can share, my email is in the chat for everyone to see, right? Not just privately. Please share it with me if you can.
All right, and then we had another question about the report asking if we can include the social security number or date of birth. I think that's something we'll have to discuss a little bit more. This report is sent over email. And so as we probably know, emails can be hacked. And so I think probably the full social is something we would not want to include, but it might be possible to include, like, for instance, the last four or the date of birth. We do include the privilege ID number, and that's going to be a unique number, for every single privilege. So if you're ever in doubt of exactly which practitioner it is, you can certainly check the privilege ID number and be able to know for sure, which privilege specifically and which practitioner is being referred to there. Anyway, but that's something we can discuss. We haven't had multiple requests for that. Yeah, but we understand that states may need that information still.
And Isabel, for that more sensitive information, it's something we could consider making available as a download through the authenticated system. So once we've ensured that you've logged in and have the appropriate permissions, as opposed to having that data sent via email, it could be something that you just retrieve directly from the system.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. That's a good thought and something that we could look into more, I think, depending on the needs of each state. We kind of know that each state is going to have different things that it needs. And we recognize that probably as states come on board, we may learn about certain new things that the state would want us to add. Yeah, so we do anticipate that. We could probably include the state license number on the report as well. I'm not really sure that's a unique identifier. I mean, it kind of is, but in the sense that, each state sort of sets up the license ID that it gives out differently. We do collect that information, and we will probably be able to search by it in the future. But well, anyway, yeah. So that's another option, and I'll just note that one, I suppose. Okay, and then to answer the question, how we look to compare some of the similar issues from the PT Compact. Yes, I think Jeff Rosa probably hates receiving emails from me at this point. That's how much we've talked to him about the PT Compact. And we've actually talked to people from other compacts as well. So for instance, we've talked to, I think actually maybe every other compact that's already stood up. We had meetings with them early on that were really helpful for us learning about, what we would need the system to do, things that we didn't anticipate or things that we were like, well, maybe we'll be able to avoid that. And they kind of said, you will not be able to avoid that, and make sure you have that function in your system. So anyway, that was really helpful for us, Nahali.
Thanks for saying that, Isabel. So part of all of this research, and there's user research with all the different folks who will be utilizing the system that's taking place. There is kind of behind the scenes research where Isabel and myself had lengthy interviews with every single occupational licensing compact commission executive director, or IT director, as it were, all of them, IMLC, nursing, PT, EMS, SIPACT. The one thing I want to point out, and this is really important for the understanding of the group, is that we built this from the ground up. Many of those compacts had existing data systems that they simply added features onto, or used, I'm sure they all probably had to build on some features. But within PT, the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy already had a data system with quite a bit of data in it, with functionality that had been built over years. Same goes for SIPAC with regard to ASPPB, which is their similar organization. Nursing, obviously, Nurses is their system. It's pretty sophisticated system, been around for a long time, that was affiliated with the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, which is their partner. IMLC did build theirs from the ground up, but they've been operationalized for longer than we have. They're actually going through a lot of improvements to their system currently. They're doing more, which is what we know. That's the reality of technologies that will continue to work and work. So we have some differences from those compacts. So we have started from the ground up. We know what we have to continue to do. Our goal is to make a functional system that we can launch by August is our goal, that will protect the public. Will it do every single thing that we want it to do? No, but we will continue to work toward that. We want a safe system that provides public protection, but is something that is our first pass, kind of like with IMLC, that they got something out there and then they said there's a lot more functionality that we need. Nursing has continued over the years to build on their system. I can't really speak to SciPact. PT, I'm sure they continue. I know Jeff Russell was very instrumental with some of the work with that as well, and he's the executive director. So that's a little bit of the difference in our system. This is ground up, not from an existing system. So it's a little different. So, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn from those other systems. I want it to be clear that what we're doing does have its differences.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Nahali. So it looks like, oh, we might have received just one more comment. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody. I want to mention one more thing. We've got a couple questions about recordings of this. So I think we'll plan to just send that out over email sometime in the next couple of days. Zoom will typically just have like a link and then you enter a password in order to access the video. So I think that will be the easiest way for us to do this. And yeah, other than that, thank you so much everyone for attending. If you have questions that occur to you later, of course, feel free to contact me, contact Nahali. And I think, we've met with a couple of states who are kind of very interested in starting to test the system and being first to come on board. Some other states are not really ready for that step yet, but if you are interested in starting that process, and you have, maybe some more questions you'd like to ask one-on-one, or you have questions that are more technical that you would want to have your IT staff involved with, then, we can go ahead and set up those calls as well. Also, Melinda, I see you had one
Isabel,
more.
I think we had one question that wasn't answered. May I answer it very quickly?
That's what I'm looking at right now. If you know I don't know which one it is, but if you do, then feel free to go ahead.
I don't. Melinda, do you mind unmuting and just asking me your question? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're fine. My question was, will the Compact Connect system handle the applications for someone who's applying to change a privilege to practice to a home state license, or is that something that the new home state will need to implement as an application in their own systems?
I can take this one if you want. So the way that the system is set up right now, like Compact Connect is not issuing licenses. We only issue privileges based on the authority of states saying that we can, but we're definitely not issuing licenses. So in any license is going to have to be issued by a state. That being said, once the new license has been issued and is recorded in Compact Connect, the practitioner will be the one to go in and switch over to the new home state. I think the commissions will have some rules about like the time frame when that needs to occur and all that kind of thing. But in terms of having a licensure process for a new home state license based on a privilege to practice, then that would be something that the state has to do. And Nahali, if you want to chime in and answer this as well.
No, I think that answers it. I mean, what the assistance the new home state is going to have is the fact that those primary source documents have already been vetted, have been collected and vetted by the previous home state. So what you will know through the system is they were eligible. So at least with regard to those items, we know that those were collected and reviewed. And the thought for that is if the person is in good standing in the compact and they've already supplied their transcript, their exams, all of those things that take time, then why wouldn't we just say we were letting you practice here on a privilege? We're gonna be willing to convert that to a license, subject to our fee, subject to our scope of practice, subject to jurisprudence exam, subject to an FBI CBC if we want a new one. Why would we ask them to gather that stuff again to provide to you if one member state had already reviewed it? That was the
And
theory.
Melinda put in the chat that answered her question. So, yep, glad we were able to answer that for you. And like I said, questions might come up after the call, might come up when you're talking to your staff about it. So we're here to answer questions in the future, or yeah, like I said, if you want to start getting onboarded, getting involved in the testing. We do have a number of states that are already doing that, and we're very grateful to those states, by the way. I just want to mention that for those of you who are in the testing, we really appreciate it. Okay, so yeah, with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up for the day. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on, and have a great rest of the day.